Okay. Okay, so that's on the right slide, is it?
It is indeed, yep. Yep. So this is going to be just a little bit different from what we normally cover. So it's looking at the public health impact of data centers. So a lot of this work stems from a paper that was published by researchers in the University of California, Riverside, and Caltech. So I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Bane. So he's kind of one of the main reasons that I'm kind of involved in this area. So I kind of took over a course from Michael last year, which was on software design and architecture. So there was a big element of green computing in that. So I kind of had a passing interest in it before then, but this is kind of when it piqued my interest. So we're both senior lecturers at MMU, and the university has recently joined the Green Software Foundation. Michael's more involved in that aspect than I am, but we had various speakers from different organizations that spoke at our courses as guest lecturers from the GSF. So as John mentioned, I've been involved in Green Software Ireland for the last year or so, just going to the regular meetups and so on. So I guess we just move on to the next. Okay, so this is I don't know if you had the previous slide. So just a slide there from just where this work, a lot of this work stems from. It was basically led by Shaylee Wren, and so he did some of the early work on quantifying the water impact of data centers. So this is going back over 10 years ago. But they've recently released an archive paper called The Unpaid Toll. So this is looking at the public health impact of data centers. So this is often overlooked. So when typically with green software, you're looking at trying to minimize your carbon footprint, but this is looking at it from a slightly different perspective. It's more in terms of what the public health impacts are, and there's just different scopes you can consider that from. So there's direct impact in terms of, say, backup generators, generating diesel powered generators if the power goes out, for instance, so that just to keep systems online. So if you consider say a platform like Facebook, if you've watched the film The Social Network, they kind of get at this point that Zuckerberg was very obsessive in terms of always having the system available, always having it online. So this kind of plays into it in terms of just having a reliable system. So most of these large data centers have a backup generators, and that produces a lot of say particulate matter, nitrous oxide, and so on. So they're kind of looking at how that affects public health in this paper. How do you go about modeling it? How do you go about quantifying it? The original title of this talk was How Data Centers Impact in Dublin, but I was talking to Shaylee Wren, who kind of leads this work, and he was saying like it doesn't obey county lines. So these air pollutants can travel hundreds of miles. They can, and where you place them is kind of important. So you have to look at things like the wind direction, the wind speed, how you go about modeling dispersion. So that this paper looks particularly at low complexity modeling. I'm not going to go into that too much, but it's if you look at the IPCC, how they come up with this figure of 1.5, they used a model called MAGIC. So that's MAGIC spelled with 2 C's. So I think the ICC is a reference to the IPCC. And it's basically just a way, because when you've got these complicated, say, climate models, they're a lot more accurate than using reduced complexity models, but they're a lot more computationally intensive. So you can't go through as many scenarios, and they're quite slow to run. So that this is kind of one of the main ideas with reduced complexity modeling or low complexity modeling. So this paper is kind of looking at those types of issues. Yeah, so I guess we move on to the next slide. So again, I have to thank Shirley Wren for this diagram. He actually shared the slides with me, and I've actually stolen a lot of content from it, and I was trying to put it in an Irish context. Myself and Michael are planning to write a paper in this area shortly, but we just need to get access to data, and yeah, just try to see what the difference is in terms of say Ireland and the US. With that paper, all of their results are based in a US context. So there's various aspects to this. So obviously companies are trying to maximize the return, so that there's a financial aspect to it, and then you've got your CO2 output, so greenhouse gases or carbon equivalent gases that are emitted. And then there's a big issue with water. So Shirley Wren did some of the early work in this area, so this is kind of well known at this point. So I suppose you can draw a distinction between, say, water consumption and water withdrawal. So let's say it's well known that if beef has a big water consumption issue, so you think about the environmental impact of that, but it's not quite as bad as water withdrawal. So water withdrawal is when you've got these big data centers and you need to cool them down, and then the water evaporates. So it could, say, go up into the jet stream, and then it goes off somewhere else. So you can get droughts in one particular area and floods in others. So you're kind of changing the ecosystem as such. So I would, so if you think of California, Silicon Valley, obviously you've got a huge amount of data centers there. And you look at, say, wildfires and so on. Well, I don't know this for certain, but it's kind of a conjecture that I have that the cooling of data centers is a contributing factor to that. So it's you've got huge amounts of water, you're cooling your data centers, it's evaporating, going up into the troposphere, so that can it's a contributor to the greenhouse effect as well. So it kind of, then you get more heating, and it's kind of a vicious circle in that sense. Then if it goes into the jet stream, then your water vapor is going somewhere else, and you're changing the ecosystem. But the paper is focused more on, say, the public health consequences. So you're looking at dispersion of particulate matter, nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrous dioxide. So these are the main pollutants that you're concerned about when you're thinking about public health. So this is kind of different from carbon because the dispersion of these gases is it has different distributions, so they're kind of weakly correlated, but there's different kind of objectives that you might want to solve simultaneously. I'll get to that a little bit later in the slides, how you might go about doing that. But this is still kind of early work, so their paper is only on archive. It hasn't actually been published yet, and it's still their first version of it. And they say they're going to redo it. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the idea anyway. So I guess we'll move to the next. So in terms of modeling the impact, there's a number of different things that you need to consider. So you want to quantify the amount of pollutants that are being emitted. And then there's these different types of dispersion models. So as I mentioned, probably the best way to do that is with low complexity modeling. So with low complexity modeling, you're just making simplifying assumptions. It's not 100% accurate, so you do lose, say, resolution. So I mentioned this magic model before, so that's what the IPC used, and it's different from, say, traditional models that have, say, a fine granularity in terms of, say, dividing up the entire planet into different grids and looking at the heat transfer and this type of thing, because that's very computation intensive. So what you do is you just make simplifying assumptions, but you want to have, there has been some research done in terms of, okay, can we show that this is actually accurate to some level? And do you have guarantees in terms of that accuracy? And so there's that, and then you want to, let's say you know the level of pollution that you have, you know how it's dispersed over a particular region, and then you have to look at it from a financial perspective in terms of what is the impact in terms of health and what are the costs of those impacts in terms of public health care. So in the US, they have a tool called Cobra. So I guess we move to the next slide. So this is by the EPA in the USA. I've developed this tool, and so you're quantifying changes in air quality. Then you want to see what the health outcomes from that are in terms of particulate matter, nitrogen, sulfur, and then try to work out what the costs are in terms of health, both in terms of what diseases people are getting and what are their health costs in terms of yeah, in terms of dealing with that. So it's this is particularly based in the USA, so there is another service that you can use from the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. So this institute dates back to the Cold War, so you had some kind of collaboration between, say, Russia and the West back in those days, just to look at, say, socioeconomic issues and the footprint of human activities. So this is kind of a precursor to the IPCC. It adopts a similar type of framework just in terms of collaboration between different governments. But they have a tool that you can use that provides data in terms of air quality and health impact. One thing it's probably missing is that you need to come up with some kind of an economic model in terms of the cost, in terms of what the impact is, just in terms of say government spending on public health and so forth. So that could be an interesting area of research to try to apply something like COBRA to Ireland or to Europe in general, or to come up with some kind of a tool that just uses the same methodology. So, I mean, a lot of these methodologies are open source, so you can just take it off the shelf and just apply it in different contexts and with different parameters, because we have different parameters here in Ireland in terms of say your temperature and how wind speed and wind directions and this type of thing, how the dispersion pattern would work. So I guess move to the next. So this is going back to, I think it was last year. The Central Statistics Office in Ireland released that data centres in Ireland account for 21% of the total electricity usage. I think that's probably an underestimate at this stage, because of the uptake of generative AI. So if you do say a query with ChatGPT, it's an order of magnitude at least more intensive than, say, doing a Google search. It's just the way these systems work. So again, you could view it from the different scopes, but just the inference, like you've got billions, or I think the latest version of GPT is over a trillion parameters. So you have to think of the training cost for that. Then there's also the cost in terms of, say, building these data structures, data centers. There's the inference costs. So if these are used over a longer period of time, that can actually be more than the training and so forth. So there, and it's typically quantified in terms of carbon, but again, the health price is slightly different because of just the dispersion of the gases that you're talking about and the air pollution. So I don't. There's a moratorium in Ireland at the moment. I believe the Green Party is responsible for that in Dublin, just on building new data structures. So the reason that came into play was primarily due to the energy usage concerns about the grid and so on. So there's a number of different venues that I get into that, like Google did appeal this, but the planning permission was rejected. But I think it's until 2028 that there will be no more data centres built in Ireland, because there's a high concentration, particularly around Dublin. And so I guess we move to the next. So this shows the distribution of data centres in Ireland. So you've got 85 in Dublin, so that's over 87%, I think, of data centres in Ireland. So having all of these data centers in the one place is not necessarily a good thing. So I mean, I haven't worked out the numbers yet, but I'd imagine that it's having them all concentrated in one place and around a very large population mass is not. It would have, say, secondary effects and so on. So if you look at the unpaid toll, that paper, one of their suggestions is that you place data centers in locations where you've got low population density. But again, it's not quite that simple, because you have to look at, say, wind speed, wind direction, dispersion patterns, and so on. So in Ireland, the prevailing wind is to the southwest. So that would indicate that Dublin is not the best place to have all of these data centers. So we have to look at why are they all placed in Dublin. And I think there are a number of reasons for it. So it's latency is one issue. If you're looking at things like AI, like you've often got batch jobs, so your training is not really latency dependent, so it doesn't really matter if you've got an extra time delay, because you're training these things for weeks or months sometimes, but depending on the size of the model. Again, I don't want to be too negative about AI. I mean, it's a kind of a broad umbrella term. So there's certain types of AI that are a lot less energy intensive. So traditionally in, say, machine learning, you're not trying to solve everything, or you're not trying to come up with a, say, foundational model, but you're trying to solve for a particular problem. So maybe you want to model, say, air pollution or something like that, and you just train your AI system just to address that one particular problem. And these kind of, say, more, if you want to call them older fashioned AI systems are a lot more efficient in terms of their data usage. But something like a foundational model like ChatGPT is very energy intensive. Of course, you've got recent innovations in terms of D.Seq, which is I think they were kind of forced into developing it in a particular energy efficient way because they didn't have access to the chips due to geopolitical issues. So a lot of these chips, say NVIDIA chips, are made in Taiwan. And obviously there's a big kind of geopolitical problem there between China and Taiwan and the US. So that there are all sorts of trade wars going on, and yeah, so that could spill over with Trump as well. He's likely to have tariffs and stuff like that. So China is they had access to older chips, and then they've got very good scientists over there. So they actually developed a more efficient model that can have comparable performance to ChatGPT. Of course, there are issues in terms of censorship and that kind of stuff. So if you look at asking about Tiananmen Square or something like that, you're probably not going to get the right answer. But for most queries, it's actually quite good. So yeah, I mean, if you were to think about it logically, if the prevailing wind in Ireland is to the southwest, and you've got batch jobs that you can say don't have latency requirements, You think Cork or Kerry would probably be the best place to put some of these data centers, because then your pollution is just going out to the sea rather than over the population. So, but there are multiple factors at play. Of course, there's infrastructure issues in terms of where your power plants are located, then there's planning. Then if there are, say, public health issues at play, then people might not want a data center to be located in their area and so on. So it becomes a kind of a political issue, and it's not just a question of trying to find the optimal place to put a data center, or a data center, I should say. So yeah, I guess to the next. So this is where power stations are located in Ireland. So there are more power stations than this in Ireland, but I'm not exactly sure what. I just got this from Google Maps, and if you search for power plants, it kind of leaves out a few of them. So I don't know if they're just going by the size of the power station, or so I just searched power stations on Google Maps, and this is what it came up with. So you see, you've got a lot around Dublin. And because there's a moratorium in Dublin in terms of the building of data centers, recently the Bog of Allen was mooted as a location to place the data centers, but I'm not convinced that that's say optimal in terms, definitely not in terms of public health, because you're right in the middle of Ireland there. Plus it's a nature reserve now, so I think the official name now is the Clara Bog Nature Reserve, because a lot of obviously the Bog of Allen was depleted, but yeah, I think that's one of the places that was muted by Google, that they could put another data center or something like that, but that was in the news maybe in December or so. So yeah, I guess we'll move to the next. So yeah, again, this is just what I was talking about there. So the Bog of Allen, so there are a number of things you need to take into account. So you need to consider the dispersion of your air pollutants, your water usage, your carbon usage, and then what are the consequences for public health. I'd say one of the reasons it might be there is because they're close to pre-existing power plants. So there would be a delay if they were trying to build a data center, say in Kerry. There could be a delay just in building it, because you need additional power infrastructure. Like Dublin has economies of scale if they have all these data structures there already, or data centers, I should say. So there are those issues, but I mean, the power consumption of these data centers is not going to go away. If anything, it's going to get a lot worse with generative AI. So I don't see that building more of them in Dublin, even if it's 2028, is kind of the right solution. So that's, I mean, I haven't done the research on this, so this is kind of still preliminary kind of conjecture ideas. Yeah, so I'll just go to the next. So yeah, as I mentioned already, the health impacts are different from, say, carbon, the gases that you're talking about. So it doesn't necessarily If you minimize one, you don't necessarily minimize the other, so it's more complicated. If you're just looking at it from, say, an optimization perspective, you've got these different objectives. So you want to minimize carbon emissions. You want to minimize the public health cost, and you also want to minimize water withdrawal. And these things are weakly correlated, but they're not exactly the same. So it's kind of, if you want to look at like an optimization problem, it's a bit more difficult than just trying to find the best place in terms of carbon. And these are all things that you want to do, so you need some kind of way to weight them. And that's a question of policy, it's a question of priorities and so on. So just in terms of the gases that we're talking about, so it's particulate matter, so it's 2.5 micrometers, so that's about a 30th the width of a hair. And these can go into your lungs and they can cause respiratory problems. So then you've also got nitrous oxide, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide. And the conditions that you're looking at are lung cancer, asthma, heart attacks, and so on. So it cause all sorts of issues. So I guess I'll move to the next. So I was just going to do this Vevox poll. So we just click on that. Like, I'm quite new to Vevox, but let's see how this goes. So I think if you scan the QR code, or if you go to the Vevox app and enter the code.
You put me on the spot here.
Yeah, that doesn't matter. We can skip it if you want. I'm running over time anyway, so I think we just skip it.
I was going to say Lord in the USA. Yeah. Oh, some people are answering already. Okay. We give everyone a second. Sorry, interruption there. Will I go back to the main presentation?
Yeah, I'd say just skip it. It's so
I think some people.
Yeah.
Are you going to tell us the answer?
Yeah. Well, this is coming from Shady Ryan, so I just kind of had a discussion with him on LinkedIn. So if we just go to the next slide. There are a couple of different issues at play here. So generally, it's approximately the same as the USA. So in Ireland, we don't have as much coal-fired electricity. So I think around half of Ireland's energy comes from natural gas. So we lower temperatures in general. Obviously, the USA has a wide variety of temperatures. We consider Alaska and Hawaii like cold and hot, but on average, we generally be lower, so you'd have less water consumption. But the population in Ireland, the population density is higher. So you're talking 4 to 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So this is less than people pay for their electricity. It's probably around 34 or 35 cents per kilowatt hour if you're talking in dollars. But this is just a cost in terms of it's an estimate. This is coming from like the equations that Cobra use to estimate what the cost is in terms of energy consumption. So because gas is cleaner, it's not quite as bad. Even though we have 21% usage, if you just look at the marginal, which is the highest in the world in terms of at a national level, but you've got places in America, I think it's like just trying to think where it is now. It's Ohio and places like that have quite a high energy use in terms of data centers as well. So yeah, so the health impacts depend on the locations of the emissions, wind direction, speed, population densities, and so on. And because in Ireland we put all our data centers around a very densely populated, or most densely populated part of the country, it's not good either. But as I said before, so the prevailing wind is to the southeast, so Cork or Kerry could be good places for state data centers that do these kind of batch jobs. So the training of machine learning models and so on. Yeah, so let's go to the next. So this is just a tool that I developed from a previous project called Acclimatize. So that was developed more in terms of water quality management. But what it does is it connects to Metaeron's API, and it just gets all the data every hour or so. It wasn't working there for a while because for some reason Metaeron changed their URL, and I wasn't really checking it. So that there's just some data missing, but this is going back a number of years. So you get wind direction, wind speed, radiation, and these kind of things are monitored on that, so people can use that if they like. Just historical data. It's open source as well, so people can run it themselves if they wish. Yeah, so this could be useful. Like I know I said the prevailing wind is to the southwest, but sometimes you want finer grained data to just come up with a more accurate model in terms of where the best place for these things to be located is. So that's one way in which you could do that. So I guess we go to the next. So there are a number of ways in which the issue can be addressed. One is what's known as health-informed AI. So this is kind of similar to the idea of carbon-aware AI. So you have a different objective function because your distribution is different for the gases that you're talking about. You just apply the same kind of concepts with a different objective. So again, it's batch jobs, it's demand shaping, those type of things from that have their origins in green computing. I mentioned reduced complexity modeling already. Standard reporting is quite good because then you can compare if different companies have the same standard that they're adhering to, then you can compare them more easily. With reduced complexity modeling, there's a need to do extrapolations, so that there's different ways you can do that. So just linear and exponential. Linear is probably just a bit simplified, and then you can also consider, this is where one place that I do differ from the unpaid toll paper. So they're just solely looking at public health, but typically you want to optimize a number of different objectives, and there's just kind of a trade-off between them. So you want public health, minimize carbon footprint, minimize the water withdrawal, And you might have different preferences in terms of which of those you want to prioritize. So you could kind of do a weighted sum over your optimization problem. So that's kind of one way you could do that. And that's Pareto optimization. There are other forms of Pareto optimization are a bit more complicated, but that's one way of thinking about it. Okay, so if there are any questions, I'm happy, or I can hand over to Michael.
Yeah, we can do questions at the end as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay.
So, Michael, will I just go to the next slide then? And
Yeah, so I'm Michael. I'm also from Manchester Met, and as Conor was saying, I'm a lecturer, and I know nowadays I do green software engineering as my main research and teaching. And one of the things that came about when I was writing this course was there's not a lot of resources out there. John kind of related to this right at the beginning. So the greencompute.uk is a resource, no matter where you live really, for people who want to find out more about what the issues are, how to measure the environmental impacts of computing, how to reduce those impacts. And next slide. So I'm going to quickly talk a bit more broader than Conor has done, and I'll kind of go through it fairly quickly. It's not as deep as Conor's stuff. So I'm going to talk a little bit about further environmental impacts, data centers, and then have a quick look at what we could do to make AI more sustainable, or our use of it more sustainable. Next slide. So I was wondering, I guess numbers in chat is what I'm looking for here. Can people guess what they would estimate? Well, can people guess the data center usage will be next year by 2026 in some form of watt hours, I would guess? If you do it in joules, you're going to have to do the conversion. That's going to be a bit harder. Anyone want to have a guess?
I can give you maybe a percentage of the grid.
Oh,
Yeah.
so I'm thinking globally here. Global DC usage. Sorry, I should have said that. Should we go on to the next slide? Because only got a limited screen. So it's 1,000 terawatt hours each and every year, which is, I think, massive number. And if you kind of group all the data centers together and think of it as a country and compare to the energy footprints of each and every country, that comes out to be 6th in the world. So it would be just behind Japan, Russia, India, America, and China. And if you want to think about the energy carbon footprint of ICT, information communication technologies generally, that's the paper in 2021 was estimating between 2 and 4%. But obviously generative AI has taken off since then. So next slide. Okay, yeah. So putting that back in context to Ireland, the estimate for 2023 was 31 terawatt hours over a year. So you can see that globally, data center usage can be 30 times the total energy usage of Ireland. Next slide. So AI has taken off. If you look closely here, this is between 2020 and 2023. And I would say Gen AI has kind of taken off even more exponentially since then. So it's gone up 30% in that time. We can just see it doubling and doubling again. But it's probably worse than that. Next slide. Because according to the report that The Guardian and the people they worked with, the tech giants are kind of underestimating, underreporting maybe, by a factor of 6 to 7 of what their actual emissions their data centers are responsible for. So energy is a big issue here. And also because of energy, not just what Conor's been talking about, the emissions of particulate matter and so on, but carbon as well. Next slide. But it's not just about carbon. There's various other environmental impacts. Water, as Conor was talking about, used for cooling. So does anyone want to have a guess, verbally maybe, how much water is required for a single email, 100 words, but if you use ChatGPT to construct that email? Next slide.
Sorry, I was going to say, but I know the
Oh,
answer.
oh, well, you got the slides.
Yeah.
No, not a ton. No. A small bottle of water, 500 milliliters, so 500 grams. But that's just for a single email. And if you think of how many emails people write, and if they were using Gen AI all the time, that just kind of scales up very, very quickly. And in terms of general water usage of data centers, if we look at the next slide, the WEF estimates that a 1 megawatt data center, so that's a pretty small one, is going to require 25.5 million liters of water every year. And that's just for the cooling. Obviously, there's more water used in electricity generation as well. As we talked about, the lack of water or the displacement of water is also going to have another adverse effect on the health of population. Next slide. Oh, there you go. So in Ireland, in terms of the amount of water in Ireland, the estimate, we use the 21% figure that Conor quoted from CSO of how much the data centers are using and the 31 terawatt hours per year. Multiply all that up by this factor that the WEF says, we can come up to 18,700 million liters of water per year consumed just by data centers. So that's pretty significant. Next slide. I haven't got quantification here, but there are also other health effects. All the minerals used to make the CPUs, GPUs, the exotic minerals, etc., they all have to be extracted. And typically this is happen in the global south with less equality of what's going on and the adverse effect on people's lives and livelihoods there. And also the actual land use for data centers take up lots of green space, adversely affecting the health of plants and animals, and rainwater fall off, etc. Next slide. So what do we need? Conor touched on standards, and MMU are quite involved with the Green Software Foundation. I'm on one of their committees, and one of the things behind the Green Software Foundation is driving standards, so we can measure what's going on. We can be able to compare different data centers. How do we know if data center A is better or worse than data center B? We can look at carbon intensity, how green the grid is at the moment, but we also need a metric that caters for how sustainably they're using water and other resources. And if we could encapsulate that into a single figure, it'd be much easier to compare data centers and then decide where and when to run a job or compare cloud providers. So no one's really doing this at the moment. There's a company called Scaleway, which are kind of based in Europe. Next slide, please. So they've got metrics that they're doing now for carbon and water. This is drawn up with one of the French environment agencies in a kind of solid mythology of how to do that. So it's something to watch, to see if it can be rolled out wider to other data centers. Next slide. So if AI is growing exponentially, and there's going to be a bigger and bigger part of motivation for companies growing data centers, what can we do as individuals or businesses to reduce the impact of AI? So we're using less AI, how can we use it more sustainably? Next slide. So I haven't got all the answers, but these are things to think about. We need to have careful choice of when we use AI, but also of when we allow AI to be used on our behalf. So we already know the answer to this. So I'll go straight on to the next slide. As Conor said, a chat GPT query uses about 10 times, maybe significantly more, depending how you measure it, than the good old fashioned traditional Google search. So the numbers from IEA in 2024, their report was about 3 watt-hours for a chat GPT request, but 0.3 watt-hours if you're going to do it the traditional Google way. And I would say, yeah, sometimes it's useful, but do we always need the kind of summary at the top of when we're doing our searches, or are we happy with a list of pages we can go and read ourselves and then form the summary and evaluate ourselves? And at the moment, many of the people providing browsers are providing kind of making us having to opt out of using AI. It's switched on by default. It's hard to find how to turn it off. So what we really want is everyone to turn off all these tools unless they're really needed. Next slide. And it's not just in the search engine. There's many agents, AI agents coming up now. These are just 2 that have come up since we said we'd do this talk. One was Bing saying, let me create your daily news. And it's like, well, yeah, but I'm quite happy going to the newspapers that I want to go to. I'm quite happy subscribing to the mailing list I want to subscribe to, choose my football team or city I live in, etc. And then another one was Windows is saying, let me plan your weekend escape. It's like, well, it'd be nice if I had a weekend where I could go on holiday. I don't need you pushing all this to me and burning, loads of carbon and creating lots of PM 2.5 pollution unnecessarily. So I feel we want to all work together to stop this kind of AI being pushed on us, but having an option so when we want it, we can opt in rather than we have to opt out of it. Next slide. And then if we're in a company and we want to use AI as a model, maybe you want to have a chatbot to sell stuff or other things like this, as Conor was talking about, we can think about which models we use and how we use them. The initial training definitely takes a lot of energy and water and creates pollution from the energy or the backup generators. But we don't need to train our own model all the time. One of the techniques if you think of the model being trained is giving it intelligence, what we can do is we can ground a model once it's got the intelligence with the information, the knowledge we want it to mine and find the answers to. And that's a lot cheaper in terms of money, time, energy, pollution than it is training a model from scratch. And models come in different sizes. We were looking at Azure yesterday, and there's 1,800 models on there. They got some with, like Conor was saying, 1 trillion parameters, but some are a lot smaller. So if you can right size your model, use the smallest one, it will run quicker, it will have taken less energy to train, and therefore it'd be much better for the environment. So choice of model is important as well. So as Schumacher said, small is beautiful. Next slide. So I think this is kind of nearly my summary. What I feel we need is for individuals to opt out of AI when they don't want it. To think about, if they're going to run models, what is the best AI model they can use, and kind of lobby for change. And for businesses, I think there's a few businesses here. Can you implement this across your company? Instead of all the browsers using AI by default, can you implement something that turns it off so every employee can still have it if they opt in, but you're not, creating unnecessary use of AI? Have you got guidelines for sustainable AI usage? Back to which model to use, and are you actively monitoring which cloud providers or data centers to use. Do you know how to do that? It's quite complex. Can we push, lobby for more standards? Next slide, please. So data centers are not all bad because of the economies of scale and the high efficiency that Google, Microsoft, Amazon have all put in. They're going to be much more efficient than having loads of servers in a cupboard in the back. But we have to use them responsibly and carefully. So appropriate use of data centers and appropriate use of AI is what we should all be aiming for. Underlying this is we're going to need standardized metrics in order to support this, both of data centers, similar to what Scaleway have started to doing, but also can we have a sustainability figure for each AI model so we can work out which one is best to use in a given case. And a couple of organizations are working towards this. GSF, they've got a green AI working group, a paper that's coming out shortly, and they've got their software carbon intensity metric, and they're looking how to apply this to AI. So it's a kind of metric for considering the carbon footprint of a piece of software, but how would you apply it to AI when you're doing inference or when you're doing training? And then the Royal Academy of Engineering recently come out with a report that's calling for the mandatory reporting on the energy and water use of AI and the carbon and waste recycling emissions to do with data centers. So some bodies are now, pushing and lobbying for this kind of thing. And then, as Conor said, more research is really needed into the health effects. Can we take the approach of COBRA and the paper that we were talking about earlier and applying it to Ireland and Europe, etc.? Next. There are all the references. And next one is, if you want to get hold of me, here's how you can get hold of me. That's the end one.
Cool.
3 minutes over.
Brilliant. I'll stop the recording now. Thanks. That was perfect. Where are we? I'm going to edit this last bit out.
You're fine.